Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Today I'm doing another batch sewing video. I'm going to make some zippered pouches or bags. I'm not quite sure just yet, but what I have are some sample swatch fabrics. So I've taken these off the card, and what I'm left with is a heap of glued paper on the top edge of both sides. So I'm obviously going to have to cut that off. The other problem that I have with these fabric pieces is that they also have a sticker on the front. Now I've been hanging on to these for the past couple of months waiting to come up with a project idea. What I've done is I've peeled the sticker off, but it's really tacky underneath. I don't want to have to waste my time washing the fabric. In fact, I've tried that and it didn't get rid of the residue. And I don't have any Goo Gone or any other products to remove that residue. And because I'm not one to be beaten, I've come up with a solution for these labels, which I'll tell you about in a sec. So what I've got are these swatch pieces. I'm going to have to trim off the excess bits there. And I also have some of these vinyl swatch pieces that I've been using over the past couple of years. So I've got quite a lot of those. So what I think I'm going to do is a two-tone bag. It will be like this, and then have half a strip on the bottom or on the top. I haven't decided yet. Don't know the measurements yet either, but you'll know them as soon as I finish the video. So how am I overcoming this? It's with my new labels. The current labels that I have aren't quite big enough to cover the area where there will be sticky residue. I've designed another style, and it's from the same company that I deal with for all of my labels. The link will be in the description below. But what I've done is ordered some faux leather labels, and these are bigger than the ones I've got currently. And the faux leather means that you can actually wash the product. So my plan now is when I remove the label, I'll have a sticky residue. I can stick my label straight over the top there. It's nicely centered already, so it doesn't matter whether it's up high or low. I can just stick that over the top and then sew it up. So that's how I've overcome that problem. Still have the problem with the fabric bits. I can't get the glue off, and I don't want to put all the fabric in the wash because that defeats the purpose of me saving my time in manufacturing costs. Plus you end up with gunk in your pillow slip or your washing machine, whatever you use to try and collect the paper. So keeping it simple, I'm going to trim off the excess, cover the sticky part, use these with it just to add a little bit of interest, and hopefully we'll have a decent bag at the end of it. You'll already know that we do. I'm going to show you how I go through the process of batch sewing all of these. I'll put the clock on. We'll talk about the time it takes and the cost involved in making all these bags and how much I'm going to sell them for at the end. So you'll get to sit there and just watch me do my thing. As instructions come up, I'll show you how I go about putting those sections together. Come along and we'll work on this together. I like to try and get some order in my fabric before I start. The first thing I'm going to do is take the upholstery samples, lay them out on the table, and then I'll take the vinyl pieces and see how I can match those up to those other swatch samples that are lying there. It does take a little while because I don't have that many vinyl pieces left. I started off with about 150 of them, but I've used most of them already. And I just thought this might be a neat way to try and get rid of a few more. In these batch sewing videos, I'm often asked for the tutorial as well. Rather than showing you what to do with these swatch samples, I'll grab some quilting cotton. I found some nice purple fabric, and I'll do the tutorial with that. So I'll be chopping and changing in between this upholstery fabric. That'll be my batch sewing side, and the purple fabric that you see later on, that's all going to be the actual tutorial. It's proving a little bit difficult to try and find some decent colours of vinyl to go with all of these upholstery samples, but I'll get there in the end. Once I do finally get all of the colours sorted out properly, I can put everything back into a pile and get them ready to start cutting. And from there, I'm going to keep all of my pieces in some kind of order. I'm still yet to decide exactly what I plan on doing, but the first thing I have to do is get rid of all of that excess paper. I'll trim off as little of the paper as I possibly can, just so that I can get the most out of the actual fabric piece. I've also decided that I'm going to cut these pieces in half. One's going to be the front of the bag and the other one will be for the back. So by cutting everything in half, then I can put the vinyl with it and set it aside. I'll go through that whole process of cutting the excess paper off the bigger pieces of fabric, cut it in half, then I'll put the vinyl together, set them aside, make a great big pile, all the while I'm making sure that I keep those sets of fabric and vinyl together. Otherwise it takes me longer to work out whereabouts I need to put all the pieces of fabric later on. In hindsight, it would have been better if I'd gone and put a new blade in my rotary cutter. Things would have gone a lot more quickly and I wouldn't have to double cut so many times. Alright, with all the fabric pieces cut out for the outside of the bag, I'm going to start putting them together. So I'll set those aside. What I've got here is one piece of vinyl and the fabric samples that I've shown you. I've cut those in half, removed as much wastage as I can, and this little bit of paper will be caught up in the seam allowance, and any excess I can just pull off. So where the sticker is where I'm going to be placing my labels. What I need to do now is attach these two pieces of fabric to the vinyl. What I plan to do is attach this piece to this side and then the other piece to the other side. My zip will be going along the end here and this will be the base of my bag. Now these vinyl pieces have a sticky label on one side. They haven't been too bad, they're actually really easy to remove, but I will leave that for the time being. And you can see some holes in the end of the vinyl here. That's where they were stapled to the sample boards. So I need to make sure I don't incorporate that into my bag. When I attach these two pieces, I'll leave an overhang. These will all be trimmed back later. I'll attach a strip of double-sided tape to the edge of the fabric. And then I'll line this up so that I get the most out of the vinyl. So that's been attached on that side, and I'll do the same here. I'll just pop a clip on the end there to hold that in place. So we've got our two fabric pieces on either side of the vinyl, and we are ready now to stitch that together. Put those together like that, and then I'll process the rest of the fabric pieces before I take it to the machine. Whilst I was creating this video, I was using a double-sided tape called Dritz Wash Away Wonder Tape. For several weeks I had been trialling lots of different types of double-sided tape. I can tell you this one was actually fantastic on the machine. It didn't gum up my needles, but it was very difficult to peel the paper off. I did do a video for all the products that I've tried and the results. I'll pop a link to those results just at the top up here and in the description box below. I don't usually have to rely on those clips either to keep my fabric pieces together, but because I'm making so many piles of them and the vinyl is a little bit rigid, it's easier just to put a clip in at the top and the bottom of each of those pieces. It'll ensure that I've got everything kept together, and when I take everything to the machine I don't have bits falling apart. Alright, I have finished attaching all of these groups of 3 together, and now I can take them to the machine. So what I'm going to do here for every one of these is sew down this long edge, down this long edge. Once I've done that, I will open it out and then I'll top stitch. So we'll go and take all those to the machine. If you have a lot of bobbins with bits of thread in there that you don't really want to use, or you need to reclaim your bobbins, this is a great time to actually use them, because we're sewing these layers together and then we're top stitching and then we're going to line the bags. The bobbin thread isn't going to be seen anywhere within the bag. So it's a good time to use up any short reels or bobbins that you have. I've popped my magnetic seam guide on, that way I can just have a nice even stitch all the way, and you can see I've just used a bright yellow thread underneath here. When I top stitch later, that'll be hidden away and it'll never be seen. So I'll come down one side and then go down the other side, then I'll set that aside, take the next set, put everything together before I do the top stitching. Okay, I have pieced all of the bag pieces together. So this is how our back and front are looking now. And what we need to do is top stitch. So you've got to decide whether you want to have your textured fabric top stitched or your vinyl fabric top stitched. I usually let the fabric tell me what it wants to do. Now the textured fabric has lots of different colours going through it, so it's going to be much more forgiving if you don't want to have to change your thread. I'm using a brown thread for my top stitching, and even if I use the grey, the brown's still going to look okay against the reds, the greys, the blacks. So it makes more sense to top stitch the textured fabric. I've increased my stitch length to 4.5 as well. It makes the job go a lot quicker too. Alright, these have all been put together, top stitched, and they're ready to be cut to size. What I need to do is square up the fabric, and when we've put this together, this is going to be the size of our little bags. We need to square this up so that we know what size our lining fabric needs to be cut to. I'll use one of the straight lines on my ruler here, line that up with the straight edge of the stitching line, and then I'll trim off as little as I possibly can. And I may actually need to use some scissors in some sections because there's quite a lot of bulk on the seams. And on the other side I'll do the same thing. So at this point here you can decide whether you want to have all of your fabric pieces exactly the same size. And if you do, I haven't decided yet, I've lined up this cut edge here just with one of the straight lines on my cutting mat, and then I'll cut off as little as possible on this side, keeping that nice and straight. That's going to be the finished size of the front and back of my bags. So once I fold that in half, that will be our size. We've still got to put a zip in and decide what we're doing at the bottom. So I can do that now for the rest of them. I'm pretty certain I said something earlier about making sure I've got a sharp rotary cutter, and I really do know better. If you're going to do lots of batch sewing like this, particularly with thick fabrics like the upholstery fabric and the vinyl, it's so much easier if you've got a really sharp, fresh blade in your rotary cutter. You know, you get into a zone and all you want to do is just keep on cutting. You don't think about how much time you're actually wasting when you have to pick up your scissors and cut a piece off that wouldn't cut properly. Next job I do, I must remember to change my blade. Now that I've finished squaring up all of these pieces, before I do anything now, I'm going to place my labels over the top of that sticker. It doesn't really matter whether I leave that label on or not, but what I will do is fold it in half, find the center, because although it doesn't matter top and bottom where it goes, I do want to have it centered. So this is my first time using these labels. I folded that in half, made a little mark there so I know where the center is, and I'll remove this horrid sticky stuff and I'll just place my label directly over that adhesive, and then I can stitch around that. So I'll do that now with all of them. I decided rather than just placing the labels directly over the top that I'd use my seam gauge, and taking into account the size of the label, I've placed the label in the centre and I've just double checked that it measures evenly on either side of the label there. And now it's time to sew all of those labels onto the front of each of those bags. Okay, my labels are in place and I'm actually a bit disappointed that a lot of them are crooked, and I think that's because of that glue residue behind the labels. So I think next time I use these, if I'm using them to cover up a sticker, I'm just going to leave the sticker in place because it's shifted whilst it's been sewing. So I'm not happy about that, but I can't reuse the labels, so I'm just going to leave it. Hopefully it doesn't look too bad later. Okay, now I need some lining. So if we fold the fabric in half and measure that, and then add some for seam allowance, that's what we're going to need for our linings. What I've measured from the top down is 14.5 centimetres, but we also need to allow 1 centimetre seam allowance. So the measurement for our lining is 15.5 by 30 centimetres. We need 2 each, or 6 1/8 by 11.5 inches, and you'll need 2 of those. I think being a lining, you can get away with 6 inches rather than, measuring that 1/8 of an inch. So for all of the lining pieces, I'm going to cut this fabric out. I don't even know how many bags I'm making. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm making 11 bags, so I need to cut out 11 pairs of lining fabric. This lining fabric is the first one that I'm using out of those 3 full boxes of fabric that I got the other day. And the amount of fabric that's in here that's usable is about 19 inches. I should be able to get 3 widths out of each section. So what I will do, I'll square up this side here and try and get as much out of this as I can to make up those 11 bags. It turned out that I didn't have anywhere near enough of that piece of fabric, so I've just chosen a couple of other random colours to cut up as well. It really doesn't matter what colours I use on the inside as long as they're fairly light. Once all the lining pieces have been cut for each of the bags, I can then start measuring up for the zips. I'm making these same bags with quilting cotton and fusible fleece as well, so the procedures for all of them are exactly the same. Now it's easier for you to see on the white side, so I'm going to show you what markings we need to make. From the sides, we're going to measure 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres on either side. That mark there will be the end point of our zipper tabs, so our zip will come along here and it'll meet up with the tab just on the end there, and the zip will extend just a little bit beyond that so that we can enclose it. After that, we've got our seam allowance here of about 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So with your seam allowance here, this section here is the width of the tab that you're going to have on the end of your zip. So it's going to give you a really nice corner. Given that my fabric is 11.5 inches or 30 centimetres, I'm going to measure the distance from here to here and then add a little bit extra. I want my zip to extend beyond that line, so I've cut my zip out at 10 inches or 25 centimetres. We're going to take some tabs. This is 3 inches or about 8 centimetres in length, and if you're using a fabric with a print, then have the printed side faced up, fold it in half, and then place that printed side on the end of your zip. Of course, before we do anything, we need to make sure we have a slider on, and I know there are many of you, like myself, that forgets to put the slider on all the time. Let's do that first. Spread the teeth apart with the curved edge facing, pop that in on one side and then on the other. Try and line up the end of the zip there, push it, hear a click, and then your zip's ready to go. It's got a little bit of a kink, so I'll try that again, and I'll just pop that in the centre there. And I'll pop another piece of fabric on the other end. Okay, that's been sealed up at the end, and we've got a nice folded bit of fabric on the end to hide the cut zip, and push the fabric away, and then you've got a nice finished zipper tab. Now we need to prepare our zips. So I need 11 of them. It's quicker just to measure them first, and then I can cut each one. You may be able to see on the cutting mat just under the zip, I've made a couple of little marks there, and I'll just line up each piece of zipper tape at the beginning and the end, and that makes it a lot quicker for me to cut all of the same lengths. After all the tape has been cut to the right length, I've then got to go and put all the sliders on. Sometimes that can take a while if I don't get them on the first time. All right, I hope that wasn't too painful to watch. Here's how to put your zip on in real time. Spread the teeth apart, grab the curved edge. Now when you cut this, you want to cut straight across. There's no need to cut chunks out. Place your curved edge over the end there, just let it sit, and pop this side in on the other side. When you put the zipper ends together, You want this side and this side to line up perfectly, and then push it together and wait for a click. Once you hear that click, you can just push your slider on. And then you want to make sure that that's nice and straight at the top there, and that this zip sits nice and evenly on both sides. If you find there's a little bit of a kink here, you'll also notice that there'll be a kink on this side. Then you'll just take it off, put it back on again. But since I got this one first go, I'm not going to. The other ones were a pain. Now I have 11 zips to do, and I need to create some zipper tabs for all of them. And we need 2 on each zip. What I'm going to do is cut a strip of fabric that's 4.5 inches wide, or about 12 centimetres. I want to be able to line up all of my zips along that piece of fabric. So you need a piece of fabric that is as wide as all of your zips so that you can sew all of them down for both sides. So this piece of fabric is folded in half, so I have 2 layers. There's more than enough there for me to do the job I need. If you're only making one bag, then all you need to do is cut a strip of fabric as wide as your zip. Cut it at about 4.5 inches, fold it in half, and attach it to the end of your zip here. So you would attach one here and one here. That will secure your little slide, and we would take that to the machine and sew down both edges. But because I'm doing a whole bunch of them, I'm going to open out my fabric, fold that in half, and the width of fabric that I'm using is really quite generous. It allows for any discrepancy in the width of my fabric pieces. I can always trim the excess off later. So just finger press that in half, and all you need to do is place your zip inside that layer of fabric. Make sure you've got a slider on each one of your zips now, because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. Clip that in place, and we'll do that for all of them. Okay, once you've done that side, we can grab our fabric and repeat for the other side. Okay, all my zips have been attached. What I'm going to do now, so all the way down one side, all the way down the other side, then we can chop them all up. Okay, all the zips are done, and now we can separate everything. I'm still at the stage where I'm using up old bobbin thread or any old thread that I have, so I haven't worried at all about the colour of the thread that I'm using to actually put my zipper tabs on. And I'll continue that when we're putting the zip on as well. It's not until we get to the top stitching that it's going to matter. So I'll separate all of those now. With our tabs, all you need to do here is just push the tabs away from the zip at both ends, and then they're completely secured and ready to go onto your bags. Let's grab our fabric. I usually have the labels on the front of my bag, so the zip needs to have the curved edge facing my left. I'll pop some double-sided tape on the end there, and then I'll centre this over the fabric. So I usually just eyeball it, but if you want to, what you can do is fold it in half and make a mark on the back of the zip there. Fold your fabric in half as well and mark the centre. So with the centre marked, line up your zip, place it on your fabric, and make sure both folds of your tab are facing outward, and press that in place. Now it doesn't matter if your zipper tab is a little bit long, because that can be trimmed back later. It's better to be long than too short. And we'll grab one of our lining pieces. Run a bit of tape along that and place that faced down. So I'm lining up the side edges first, and then I'll line up the top edge. Again, you can just fold that lining piece in half, mark the centre and line that up with the zip. So that's ready to go to the machine. We'll sew that in place, and then we'll top stitch. When you sew this in place, stitch it from the side that's got the stabiliser or the heavier side, then there's less movement in your fabric and you won't have it stretching out as much when you get to the end. Some of my bags are a little bit wider than others. When I make these zips, I'll usually line it up without the tabs folded out and just make sure that there's enough of a clearance on either side for the seam allowance, but I also want to have enough of a clearance to have a little tab at the top here. So for this particular bag, this zip is just a little bit too long. So what I've done is just come and stitched in a little bit more on the tab here, and I'll just trim off that excess. I can still open the fabric out, but it allows me to manipulate the size of the zip without having to undo any stitching. I can just come in a little bit. It doesn't affect anything else on the zip because the slider is still going to be wherever it needs to be. So that way I can quickly manipulate the size of these tabs when you've got different sized fabric pieces. From one end of the zip to the next, plenty of room for my seam allowance, and I will have probably about a 1 centimetre tab by the time I've done my seam allowance. I've run out of the other double-sided tape that I'm using, and here I'm using a really narrow one. This narrow tape isn't something that can be used in the sewing machine, but because I'm not actually sewing in the area where the tape is, it's not going to be an issue. Normally I'd like to do my linings at both ends rather than just doing the top end first, but because I've already got tabs on the end of my zip, it'll make it more comfortable for me and it'll go a lot quicker. If I just do the first lining and the second lining, I'm just going to sit with it so that when I do the batch sewing, all of those pieces can remain together. These can all go to the machine now, and I'll sew down this long edge of the zip. When I open it out, I'll do the top stitching. When I do the top stitching, I need to make sure I've got the right thread on, and on this side I want to have a matching thread as well. So once we've finished putting this side of the zip on, if you haven't already got your matching threads, do that. I think this is my favourite part of batch sewing. I love to have all my fabric pieces in a pile. I'll take each piece, sew all the zips down on the first side. I also make sure I keep that extra lining piece with the fabric when I'm sewing each zip. Then I'll set that aside, do the next one. Once all of those are done, then I can open out all of the fabric, place the lining neatly behind the outer fabric, and then I can go and top stitch. You'll notice that when I'm top stitching, I'm not actually sewing from the outside edge. I'm sewing where the zip and the tab meet. That'll help me have better corners later on. And I'll do the same thing at the other end as well. I'm just sewing from one end of the zip to the other without actually sewing in the section where the tabs are. We've got the edge of our tab here, and we've started our top stitching right here rather than at the very end. We've come along and finished where the zip meets the tab again. Turn this around and we'll attach this side to the other side of the zip. Grab your other lining piece and we'll place that directly over the top of the other piece of lining. Now we can go and sew this side, and we'll open it out and do a top stitch. This is where I feel like I'm really starting to make progress, because I know that once I've actually finished putting all of these zips in and done the top stitching for the other side of the bag, I know that there's not much left to go, although it's probably still several hours for me. With the zip done on the other side, we now have to top stitch the other side of the opening. It's a little bit difficult to do now that we've got tabs closing the end of our bag. So I still have it inside out, and I've got the zip open all the way. What I want to do, just manipulate the fabric so that the lining is underneath again, and get this piece of fabric under my machine. And again, I'm going to start where my zip meets the tab. not right at the very end of the fabric. So to the other end, stopping where the zip and the tab meet. Because I'm doing the top stitching now for the zip, I've changed my thread to the same brown that I used for the top stitching earlier. I've also changed my stitch length to be the same stitch length that I used in that top stitching when I was putting the fabric pieces together. I did also manage to get rid of a whole heap of bobbins and short reels of threads as well. Turn it the right way around, have a good look at it, and if you're happy with that zip, we can go on to the next step. You can see the tabs there are well away from the edge of the seam here, and by the time you take into account your seam allowance, you're going to have a really nice amount of tab at the end. That'll make your bags look a lot nicer. Open your zip all the way. If you don't do this now, you're going to be in trouble later. Let's turn our bag inside out. I've got the outer fabric on one side, the two lining pieces on the other. We're going to line up the seam that we've got here where the two fabric pieces meet. I like to push the tab toward the lining. It doesn't really matter which way it goes, but you just want to make sure you line up the top edge of the fabric there where the zip ends, and then even that out. Repeat for the other side, matching these seams. Okay, I'm hoping I can show you a close-up view of the side here. You can see along here where the fabric has been top stitched to the zip. You've got your outer fabric and your lining top stitched to the side of the zip, and that's created a bit of a fold in there, and it's the same underneath. And that's what causes a lot of bulk when you're sewing the side seams up. By not stitching all the way to the end, you have a row of stitching on this side and a row of stitching on the other side that doesn't add any bulk to the side seam, and it helps you manipulate the fabric a little bit better as well. As you're sewing along, you'll just manipulate the fabric so that it sits there, and that reduced amount of bulk from the lack of stitches just makes enough of a difference that you're going to have nice corners. That, as well as the fact that you've got the tabs on the end, they all reduce the bulk that you have on the end of your fabric, and that helps give you really nice corners. This will go to the machine now. We'll go straight down the side edge, across, stop here with a back stitch, and we'll do the same along here and leave an opening for turning through later. It's been a bit of a marathon effort making all these 11 bags. At this point, I'm only going to show you how I do one of these bags rather than all 11 of them. I reckon you guys would be happy about that too. Okay, that's done. If you've got zipper tabs sticking out on the side, you can trim that off now. And we need to box our corners. I usually do this at the machine and use one of the markings on my stitch plate. We only want to have a really small boxed corner, so I'm going to measure 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from the stitching line and from the fold line, and that's just a very tiny boxed corner, and we'll do that at both ends of the bag. So for the lining, we've got the stitching, we've got a seam at the bottom here, so we're going to take that measurement from the stitching line on both sides, and we can cut that out. With your outer fabric, we'll spread the front and back apart, open out this little corner here, line up this seam with the centre of the bottom of your bag, and do the same on this side. And we'll do the same on the lining. And you'll see when we do the batch of bags how I pinch this out at the machine and use a guide on my stitch plate. Let's sew those corners up. I'm going to take these straight to the machine and just use the 1/4 inch guide on my stitch plate as my measuring template. And that way I don't have to worry about wasting time folding the corners out and measuring them. I can do all of that straight at the machine. Let me show you how. So what I'll do here is pinch the edges out away from each other. I'm lining up the seam at the bottom with the seam at the side, and I can just feel the seams locking together, and I'll line that up so that the stitching line here forms a point with the corner of the bag. And that corner where the fabric meets is what I'm going to line up on the 1/2 inch line of my stitch plate. And that's all I'm going to sew for the box corner. And those little ears I can trim off later. So that's all I'm going to do for all 4 corners on each of the bags. I'm always really pleased when I get to this part of my batch sewing. I know that there's not much more to go. I also get really tired of doing the same thing over and over, and I'm looking for the next project that I want to do. So we're nearly finished, 10 more box corners to go, close up all the bags, and then we're done. All right, we're almost done. The corners have been done on all of the bags. All I need to do is clip them, tidy up any other little straggly bits, and then I can turn everything the right way around. So I'll do that for all of the bags now. All right, now that those corners are done, we can turn this the right way around, poke out the base, check that your lines match up here, poke out the top of your bag where the zipper tab is, and if you're happy with that, grab the opening at the lining here where you've already sewn it, pull that taut, the fabric will want to fold under, and we can stitch that closed. So I won't make you sit there and watch every one of these being closed. This is the only one we're going to do. And we're done. And the last little thing I'm going to do with all of my bags is pop one of these little elastic toggles onto my zip. This means that I don't have to create a tab for the side of my bag. If I just pop that onto the zipper pull, then you've got something to hold on to whilst you're opening and closing your bag. And there they all are. I've got to say, I am so glad that this project is finally finished. It's been 6 weeks since I've made all of these bags. I made 11 in the upholstery fabric, and I ended up making 4 with this pansy fabric. And the reason why it's taken me so long to get this video up is because I've had 57 different pieces of footage that I've had to stitch together and edit over the past 6 weeks. So whilst the whole project didn't take me long at all, it's taken me about 30 to 35 hours just to edit this video this far. So how did I go for time, and what am I going to sell these bags for? This project wasn't without problems. Because I didn't strictly measure the width of all of my fabric pieces, I basically cut all my zips out at one size, and that meant that some of them were a little bit too long for the bag and I had to trim them back. So some of my tabs on the very end were a little bit tight, so I'm not happy with that, but they still look fine. My corners have still turned out all right, and that's one of the reasons why I ended up making these in the purple, was so that you could actually see exactly how the bags are supposed to be made when you do the job properly. I've only timed myself making these bags with the upholstery fabric. I've included all the time that it takes me to get the paper off, the cutting, the sewing, right down to putting the little pull tabs on the ends. All of that time has been factored into my costs and has given me my final selling figure. When I start a project, I usually have an idea in mind that I'd like this item to be $10 or $20 or whatever it is. So I have a goal and I'm always happy if I can reach that. Did I reach that? Let's find out. I've made 11 bags. It took me 5 hours. The hourly rate that I pay myself is $45 an hour. And in that $45 an hour, I've said to myself, okay, if I were employed as a seamstress somewhere, I would probably get about $27 an hour as a full-time employee. That's only just a really rough estimate, and this is in Australia as well, mind you. I've started with a base wage for myself at $27 an hour. Then I've factored in things like power, insurance, taxes, thread, subscriptions I've got to pay, website fees, rent, tools, machine maintenance. All of those sorts of things are incorporated into my $45 an hour rate that I like to allocate to everything that I do. I'm going to put a list up here so that it's easier to understand. So to make one bag, based on the time it takes me, it's $20.45 just in the labour costs alone. $2 for my label, the zip, the zipper pull, and that little floppy tab on the end. That was $1.20. So the total selling price for the bag should be $23.65. When I started this project, I had an idea in my mind that I wanted to get $25 per bag, and that's close enough to the $23.65 that I'm going to price these out at $25 each. My zippered bags usually get around about that price as well. I have lots of them that are much more expensive, and I also have a heap that are only about $15. $25 is an average price for my zippered bags, so I think these ones are a little bit nicer having that vinyl base on there as well. It was nice to finally get rid of a lot more of it too. With these ones here, I didn't have to add any stabilizer because the upholstery fabric has enough stability in it already, so I saved on costs there. If I were to make them in quilting cotton and use Pellin or some kind of fusible stabilizer, I'd have to factor that into my production costs as well. So 11 bags, 5 hours. I'm going to sell them at $25 each. I will make them again. I have lots of upholstery samples that are this size, so I think this is going to be a really good one to make again. Next time I will make sure I have all the lengths exactly the same. Then I know I can have my zips the same size as well, and it'll be a lot quicker and easier for me as well. I will also make sure that I've got a brand new blade in my rotary cutter because it's a real pain and not a very safe practice at all to be cutting with a blade that isn't sharp enough. For the labels that were a little bit wonky, I did end up undoing those. I found that I could unpick them and restitch them again at least the one time without putting big holes in the labels. I didn't really know how they were going to work out. I'm happy with the labels. What I would do next time, and what I have been doing since, is putting a couple of strips of double-sided tape on the back of the label and sticking that to my fabric, and then that's nice and secure so that when I sew them on, they don't shift. The other thing I do with these faux leather labels is use my vinyl foot or a walking foot. I found that also helps prevent the labels from moving. I need to go and have a cup of tea and finish editing this video so that I can finally get it up and start on my next big batch sewing project. I do have another one on the go. It's sitting on my table over here. There's 6.5 meters of fabric all cut up, already fused, and I've just been trying to finish this video up first. I like to stick to one batch sewing project at a time. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.